Hey, Book Dragons. It is your girl Lindsay here with the Spine Bookcast. Thank you for joining us. Today we have the amazing Bill Levine. I'm going to let him introduce himself and then we're going to get into it. Bill, how are you doing today?
I'm okay, and just so we're consistent, it's Levine. People pronounce my name differently depending on their preferences, their tastes, but yeah, I'm fine. If you don't know about me out there, I'm the director of graduate studies in English at MTSU. I've been at MTSU since '98. I've been teaching college level English, full time since a long time ago, '89. And I ran for one of the state house seats a couple of years ago. It's a little tough when you're a Democrat here, but we need to really challenge the political establishment in several different places. And I have been active, at least in attending, what are sometimes very painful county school board meetings. So, I'm learning a little more about what they do there in terms of their book bans, and we hope at some point we can try to reverse the tide there, because it's a pretty deadly tide, I think, in terms of freedom of reading options for the high school students in particular.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so sorry I mispronounced your last name. I do apologize about that. So let's get into it, shall we? How did you get into reading?
Oh, goodness. I probably was surrounded by a lot of very strong options as a kid. I remember, probably almost every weekend there was at least a brief trip to the one of the public library branches. And at the time I grew up in New York, in one of the outer boroughs, Queens. I mean, you could go in any direction, never had to walk very far. Even in storefronts, there were strong enough libraries, at least for most people's purposes. And there's great Carnegie libraries that were endowed generations ago, and they certainly held up over time. So yeah, I remember I liked reading biographies for some reason when I was just in early grade school. And then you get hand me downs. There were book clubs in grade school as well. So the funny thing is, I didn't really like what they did in school with monitoring your reading level with little short whatever essays or stories, and you had to answer your reading comprehension. But having the freedom to read was really a great thing. And then you start graduating to more challenging works, like of fiction, for example. I had a high school teacher who just gave us a long list of books that were provocative in one way or another. So in high school, even though it was a math and science high school, I mean, I picked up a taste for Dostoevsky's novels, like Crime and Punishment. So yeah, never really dropped it, no matter what track I was on at earlier stages of education. I wasn't always bent on being a college professor in English, but that's how it worked out.
Okay, that's awesome. So was there a book when you were younger that was your favorite book?
Hmm. Yeah, kind of hard to go back that far and remember. But I guess remember like a kid's detective series called Encyclopedia Brown,
Oh,
and you'd
I
always
love
look for the
that.
latest installment. Yeah, so I wasn't a Hardy Boys kind of guy for some reason, but yeah, Encyclopedia Brown was great. I mean, you could relate to the characters. I think there might have been a pet in there, like a dog or something too. So, it really was pitched to kind of life you might have had anywhere growing up, but with, that real kind of Sherlock Holmes thing about solving problems and picking up rational clues. So yeah,
Sure.
really liked it. Looks like you got your dog here too.
Yes,
Yeah, all
yes.
right. I never owned one, but I they like me when I go to people's houses. Yeah.
So we did AuthorCon this weekend, the first annual
Mhm.
AuthorCon, and I am at home in my pajamas today because all of us who worked it are just absolutely exhausted. So I was like, everybody take today
Mhm.
off. we're not going to do anything. So tired. Um,
Yeah, I hope that turned out really well. By the way, I know this was
it
your
was
first
a
try for it.
it was a grand slam. I had several people tell me that I knocked it out of the park, that it was very organized, and I should
Mhm.
hope so, considering I overthought about everything. I'm such an overthinker, and I mean, I had the amount of sheets and Excel spreadsheets and documents and just notes that I had for myself. So I'm really glad that we pulled it off, but it was a lot of work, and I'm really excited about next year. So, what kind of dog
Okay.
do you have?
I'm sorry, what kind of dog?
Yeah, what
No,
kind of
I was about to say never owned a dog. We had cats
Oh, I'm
for about
sorry. Okay.
16 years, just your basic American Short. I was just kind of making a little remark that, these days, whenever I go to somebody's house and there's a dog, they seem to love me. Like I started using some kind of pomade on my beard and they pick up the scent on
Oh,
that.
yeah.
So, I get a little facial wash that way, I guess. But yeah, maybe when I retire, I'll be able to take care of a dog. Give them a lot of attention. We'll see.
My dogs are both. We have a pity mix and then a boxer mix, and both of them are dorks, and I love them to pieces. But
Yeah,
yeah,
that's what
I
people
love
like
my
about
husband's
dogs,
beard as
goofiness.
well.
All right.
So I know that we met at just for those who are listening, we met at a school board meeting.
Mhm.
And you and I have talked a little bit, but I was not able to go to the last Thursday school board meeting.
Mm.
So, talk to me about what happened. I know what they did, but I want to know from someone who was there because I know you spoke. So, can you talk to me about that?
Yeah. Yeah, finally got a chance to speak. I mean, some of the earlier meetings, it was hard to find breathing room for that because, as you have observed in previous meetings, you have these large factions of people from one of the large, evangelical churches in town that tries to throw its weight around, and
Hmm.
they're all in favor of banning anything they think is dangerous or sinful, kind of overreaction. And I'm sorry to say, most of the county school board is kind of in their pocket. So I would say, out of the 3 or 4 meetings I've attended, last Thursday was one of the quieter, most mellow meetings. It wasn't as well attended. They only had a few books, maybe five. I know one of them was a series, sounded kind of like manga comics to me,
It
like
is. Yeah, it
Assassination
is.
Squad, I think it's called. So, I won't count all 15 titles. I mean, it just kind of got their
Oh, yeah, it's
quick
a
across the
famous
board ban.
manga graphic novel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I'm actually happy that I was scheduled for last Thursday because a book that I hold near and dear is Catch 22. And, again, if I were a high school student now or in any of the past, whatever generations since it's published, I would say you've got to put that on the agenda. Even if you're not teaching it in class, you have to make that kind of critique of absurd bureaucracy available to students if we're going to make our country's democratic ideals better, and make them something that what at least minimum treats people equally, makes sure that if they're doing public service, it's constructive. That is the best modern critique, of any book in the last 70 years. Now, it is satirical. It does have some ludicrous moments, but, if they just want to ban it because there are 1 or 2 scenes that involve erotic subjects, sex, that to me is one of the continual blunders that committee makes. You can't really judge a book just by one small component in the larger work. And, I mean, if kids are going to grow up like by 11th or 12th grades, they should know how to deal with such subjects maturely. So that's kind of off the agenda of most board members. Thankfully, one of the two board members who consistently votes with the librarians, school librarians, reviews, which are very thorough and balanced. He approached me after the meeting, and he knew that 3 minutes for someone like me who's used to, talking for over an hour or something, that wasn't enough. So he asked for my notes. That would be Mr. Stan Vaught. And, he said that he thinks that he can use some of what I was trying to present for his further purposes in that committee to be a good advocate for, kids having this kind of freedom to grow and, knowing how to negotiate, navigate the complexities, the difficulties of the world rather than being infantilized and, having these works not available on high school grounds. I know, smart kids are going to find the books anyway,
Sure.
but, I think the school with its professional staff, with a trustworthy adult community rather than some community that's just trying to, score points by being big, bad censors.
Hmm.
They'll have the people who can guide them to maturity reading these books.
Sure.
So, by the time I see them in college, I want them to understand why Shakespeare makes dirty jokes. I mean, that's just even the
Oh,
tip of
I
the
mean, yes.
iceberg in what they should
Yes.
be confronting when they're taking like a sophomore literature course. They should be prepared for it. So, yeah, I think I was kind of met with silence for the most part, but, I'm glad at least one or two of the board members were really listening and understood the different point of view that I think has been suppressed. So, yeah, the meeting had its usual recognition of a sports star, and I get that. It unites the school. Women's wrestling is becoming a big thing. They apparently have a strong
Sure.
program in that. And not every kid is going to be an academic star. So sports is the forum for, whatever validation, recognition. But, I even told them I think academics should be promoted to the same degree that they give recognition to these athletic programs. And, other than that, it was just the usual
Rhetoric.
ordinary business.
Yeah.
They're kind of self-congratulatory at the end on what a great system they have. But, if they're just talking about standardized tests, to me, that's not the
Yeah.
whole picture of education. Yeah.
So, what were some of the things that you talked about in your 3 minute speech? Because I know that for me, Catch 22, I love that book. I love that book so much. And I
Mhm.
read it probably, gosh, I want to say 10th or 11th grade. I can't remember. And I love that
Mhm.
book. So, what did you talk about in your
Yeah,
speech?
I didn't read the book specifically, but Water for Elephants got an immediate ban, even by some of the sympathetic people. So, again, that might be because of, mention of homosexuality. But yeah, I started out by, making that remark about sports versus athletics, but that killed a lot of the 3 minutes, didn't it? So by the time I was really getting into my groove about, trying to understand from the student's point of view why it's important to grow up and meet the world and why reading in general teaches empathy. It's not just about reading and writing skills to take English courses. I did mention that, the humanities sometimes get into second or third place compared to the STEM subjects. I was really happy that, what kids in agricultural clubs were recognized several weeks ago. But if you really have to learn how to think and how to open up from like a small silo to a larger world and really understand lived experience of other people, there's no reason to restrict reading at all. And frankly, I don't know what your experience in school was like, but the kids who get into trouble were not the readers, right? They had other factors in their lives, like dysfunctional families or bad influences maybe in their communities. But reading is really a way of seeing how we're made up, like even in a county or town like this, of people in different, ethnic, class, income levels that dictate their lives. How do these people deal with everyday, issues and conflicts? How do we have common experiences with these people, even as we're learning about different ways of life? So I don't see how it can hurt the kind of makeup or fabric of a high school where, typically people form their cliques and they're all in
Sure.
their sort of little pockets. But I think reading is the way of bridging those differences and finding a common culture, and really talking from the students level of what they're getting out of this, how it responds to something in their lives, or how it opens up their eyes to something they hadn't thought about. That's like the basic agenda of any literature class, whatever
Oh,
level we're
absolutely.
talking about.
Well, and I mean, I've
Yeah.
talked, to the board when I've spoken about the type of people that are reading and the type of stories and that kind of stuff. So I love that you bring that up, that it's not just about reading for fun, it's also about recognition of other cultures and other situations and empathy and that kind of stuff. Did you have a book that you read recently, like within the last, say, 10 years, that you've
Mm-hmm.
read and it has just really kind of left you stunned by its brilliance, or how much you've really loved it, or anything like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, I obviously had advanced academic training in my, degree to be a college professor, but very late in life, really, I recently published an article on a writer who represents to me the best possible outcome of what was called the Latin American boom of, mostly the 1950s, 60s, 70s. So everybody thinks Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who is, a major world writer, but I actually gravitated towards a writer, Julio Cortázar. And, I'm happy that a piece I wrote, over 2 years ago, finally, with the slowness of academic publication, finally came out. But it was a story I was teaching regularly, and it always left me, and I think the students, in a lot of mystery, but I knew it was a great story. This is a course I have regularly taught for over 20 years now, sophomore level jazz and literature. And this story
Oh,
was very closely based on a major revolutionary jazz saxophonist, Charlie Parker. But you're thinking
I
this is an
love Charlie
Argentine writer
Parker.
who lived in Paris most of his life, still writing in Spanish, but he was kind of unpopular with the authoritarian governments in Argentina at the time. So yeah, the more I've learned about him, the more I want to look into more of his work. I'm kind of plowing through the short fiction when I get a chance. But yeah, he takes on all the important questions about what music means to us. What does jazz do when people attach to it like it's a religion?
Mhm.
How are there both like creative and destructive forces going on in
I
any
now want to come
creative
sit in
art
on
that's
your
trying to be
class.
revolutionary?
I really want to come
Mm-hmm.
sit in
All
on your
right, but the
class,
story is
man.
called The Pursuer, El Perseguidor in Spanish. Unfortunately, even growing up in New York and living in Texas for 10 years, I never learned Spanish adequately. So I have to people in the world language department at MTSU. They gave me help with some of the translations, but
Sure.
there's a great English translation by Paul Blackburn, who's kind of a hipster poet. And, I think he really got the jazz lingo down almost perfectly, even
I
if he makes some
love
technical
that.
errors in translation. Yeah. So yeah, that's a story where, I actually stopped teaching it to sophomores, but I felt I had an obligation to really work out the puzzles in that story, because it doesn't come to an easy conclusion. It's written from the point of view of a jazz critic who has like a self-interest in latching onto this artist, but he realizes he'll never be that artist at the same time.
Sure. That's an interesting point that you bring up about music and reading and how they do kind of go together. And I
Mm-hmm.
love that you talk about the jazz era, because the Harlem Renaissance is one of my favorite
Mm-hmm.
eras in history because of the music and the books and how they go together. And um, I really, really love Langston Hughes, is one of my absolute favorites,
Yeah.
because, and Charlie Parker. Like I have lately gotten into this whole Mississippi blues, jazz
Mhm.
kind of era, and I've been buying vinyl records and listening to music that I haven't heard before. And every time I go to Memphis, I've got a friend, and I'm like, "Give me another record. Give me somebody that you recommend." And I've gotten a lot of that kind of like jazzy stuff, and I love to listen to them sometimes when I'm reading. So, how do you think music and reading, like, why do you think that is such a
Mhm.
connected duo?
Sure. Okay. So in this course, I mean, I was really happy to get the chance to put it together a couple decades ago. And of course, we do read Langston Hughes. That's the first story we look at by him called The Blues I'm Playing, about a young, ambitious woman who comes up from the South to Harlem in like the late 20s or so,
Sure.
and she's like really grounded in the jazz blues style at the time.
I
If you ever
love
heard of
that
Mary Lou
story.
Williams, she
I
was
know
one of,
exactly which one you're
yeah,
talking about.
yeah, and again, you have kind of a foil, a rich older white woman who's a patron who just doesn't get it, who wants to turn this pianist into a classical prodigy. And, the pianist likes playing classical music, but more as kind of merging with her techniques with blues and jazz. So, yeah, Langston uses poems as well. The Weary Blues is a classic. You could teach that probably even to fifth graders, and they would get it. He uses the most accessible of a lot of those writers from the Harlem Renaissance. So yeah, I think like with Hughes, obviously he loved the music, but to put the rhythms of jazz and blues into the poetic rhythms, he was really a pioneer in that regard. I think writers who have an interest in jazz are often drawn to the creativeness of the forms of jazz. Like you're not even writing in a straight line fiction story, like the typical
Sure.
arc. You're kind of playing around with the form. And, they often look to jazz artists like James Baldwin. I mean, he's after the Harlem Renaissance, but, he lived in Paris and was good friends with Miles Davis for several years.
Yeah.
So just looking at them as the most daring artistic models, I think, who, kind of stood against the mainstream popular culture for their own vision.
Yeah.
And, I mean, the writers really understood, like, especially coming out of Harlem and the African American community, how these were the voices. Like Baldwin really goes to an
I
extreme
love
with this,
Baldwin.
almost like they're prophets. They can save people. Yeah, Sonny's Blues is the great story. And again, you get a kind of pairing because Sonny has an older brother who's a straight arrow, who's a high school algebra teacher, and came out of kind of a ghetto environment, both of them. But it takes like 40 pages, I would say, for
Yeah.
Sonny's older brother to finally listen to Sonny and understand what the artist is struggling to communicate, what must be said, like taking the old blues forms, but they have to be translated for every generation into the, idiom, into the manner that people, growing up in any new generation would be listening
Sure.
to when, Harlem is subject to bigger urban dysfunctions after the Second World War when that story takes place. So yeah, that's the answer in short, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, there's been great friendships among jazz musicians and avant-garde writers in particular, and I often try to go back to those times, like in the beat era, the 50s, for
Sure.
example. And you're a great bookshop owner, so you might know about City Lights, the poet
Oh, yeah.
Lawrence
I know all about
Ferlinghetti in
that
San
stuff.
Francisco. Yeah, Columbus Avenue, and those poets too, picking up the bop rhythms of their time. On the Road by Kerouac, of course, is the one that maybe not in this school district, but it should be taught as a masterwork of
Yeah.
American
Yeah.
literature of that
Absolutely.
particular era. And of course, they go out, the characters in that book to hear jazz all through the novel. Okay, you're still there.
Yeah, no, I am. I have to let my dog out. Welcome to podcasting at
Understand.
home.
Oh yeah,
No,
yeah. We don't have a set studio. Yeah.
no. No, I love that you mentioned Miles Davis because I grew up listening to all of that. So my mom was 30 years younger than my stepfather. So I got
Hmm.
multiple generational books as well as music. So, I grew up listening to Miles Davis and the big band era, and all of the swing
Hmm.
music like Scott Joplin. I remember my stepdad used to play Scott Joplin on the piano, and just that the entertainer, da 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 da,
Hmm.
and that,
Yeah, sure.
yeah, the loved all that music, and I think that when you think about music and you think about books and the history of literature and music, that they have gone hand in hand forever. That because I know that our English teacher when I was in high school, she taught Shakespeare like it was music and talked about how you have to read Shakespeare plays
Hmm.
in a rhythm, which further explained all of the punctuation and grammar that he wrote with, that it was a way to show you how to read it. It's not just, oh,
Hmm.
Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo. No, there's a pause.
Hmm.
There's, and I love, I hadn't thought about it until you and I started talking about the connection and duality of music and words. And I mean, words and music can also, if you just read like some of Tupac, who's a famous
Hmm.
rapper, you read some of his
Yeah,
poems,
sure.
just read them. They're beautiful. And Kendrick Lamar, there are entire
Hmm.
classes
Yeah.
taught about his writing. And I
Hmm.
mean, he even today you'll see him taking college level courses to try to improve. Like there was a picture the other day of him in a sociology or a psychology class, and you're sitting here, someone like me, why is Kendrick Lamar taking a psychology class? But then you read some of his lyrics, and it's kind of, huh, okay, that makes sense. Do you have a favorite combination of musicians or a musician slash writer, like that you read this book, you have to listen to this musician kind of thing?
Mm. Yeah, and point. I mean, I always do that with the stories in my jazz and blues lit course. So, recently I've been having them read the students Billie Holiday's autobiography, Lady Sings the Blues. And a lot of that is, a little bit of fiction. I mean, it was kind of cobbled together. She was putting her career back on track for a little while when it was published. So has some sensational elements. But yeah, you've got to listen to what she says. Like I think in one chapter, she says she was recognized because not so much for technical singing. I mean, she would say she only knew how to sing six notes, a bit of an exaggeration, but like the way she pronounces the word love and hunger in songs. I mean, nobody really put the level of feeling or even the way like good writers know about the way vowels have a kind of pitch or intonation, or the way she could syncopate lyrics, just putting them in the right place, even if they
Yeah.
weren't songs that she wrote. She would put her stamp on the great American songbook numbers of the time. That was her repertoire. So yeah, I mean, that's like almost a no-brainer. You have to have the cross list of songs, which I think happened in the 50th anniversary edition of that book. If it wasn't like a companion CD, there was definitely a discography at the end of it. But yeah, the examples are manifold. I mean, I definitely want the students, to listen to clips of Charlie Parker going on a variety show and how he was, treated by the host. He was playing with Dizzy Gillespie, a song called Hot House, in
Uh,
reference to that Baldwin story, Sunday's Blues. You got to listen to that, but you also have to listen to Louis Armstrong, actually living much, later than Charlie Parker, and kind of doing that traditional New Orleans jazz in a way that was, mainstream by the 1960s or so. But yeah, there's a funny passage in that story where, the older brother wonders why the younger brother is going into jazz. And he says, "Oh, Louis Armstrong." And the younger brother says, that down home nostalgic crap and all that. So, I mean, we look at Louis Armstrong in his time as obviously a great, innovator in jazz, what he could do with the trumpet like in the 1930s. But, basically that difference between being an entertainer versus being an artist, it's kind of a running theme. Book. So, I'm never disrespecting any artist, but we understand why certain times, gravitate to a more dynamic style of jazz when the world is going faster and becoming more complex.
Yeah.
You can't just go back to nostalgia. I mean, there's a famous jazz quote, a drummer, Shelly Manne from the West Coast in the 50s, who said, "We never play it the same way once," right? Go figure that one out. So, yeah, jazz is about continual reinvention for, both the way art has to try to speak to the most, complex and disturbing, but also very, like we say, enlightening and transformative moments of any given time. And, you have to listen. That's why writers care about it so much, right? You're forced almost to get out of your normal listening habits to follow what jazz musicians might be doing in
Yeah.
any combo.
Well, and the
Mm-hmm.
other thing that I was thinking about too is you know this whole year of the book banning thing is books were not the only thing that were banned. Music was banned too, especially like
Sure.
1930s Germany. There's a movie called Swing Kids, and it's about a group of
Mm-hmm.
kids who love swing music. And they were readers and they were listeners. And so I think it's really interesting that books and music are both jointly seen. I mean, even in the 50s when you had rock and roll with like Elvis Presley and that kind of
Mm-hmm.
stuff,
Yeah.
and like the Big Bopper, and you had people getting so offended by music and books. It's for me, my whole life, music and books have gone together. So, what do you think
Mm-hmm.
it is about books and music that frighten people to the point that they need to be banned or hidden from
Mm-hmm.
listeners and readers?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm not going to get into personal observations about people on the
Sure.
Kern County School Board, but again, you're reminding me of a story that I habitually teach called Eine kleine jazz music. It's a little bit of a play on words with Mozart's Eine kleine Nachtmusik, but it's
Sure.
set in World War II. Now it's the Czech Republic. It was Czechoslovakia at that time, and it was right after the so-called, Nazi annexation of that state, which was supposed to be a sop to Western Europe. That was like the concession to Hitler, so that the
Sure.
Germans were not going to invade France or bomb England, right? So anyway, the blunt matter of that story is that the young people in the Czech Republic love jazz. They don't want to play, German marching music. They don't even want to play Czech nationalist music. They want the freedom that comes with jazz expression. And of course, the people in this generation are open. They take in a woman whose parents were killed, a young woman in German concentration camps, and even though she's German, they make her one of their own. So again, the music itself has like a racial content of African American creation of Jewish musicians too, like Benny Goodman. That would have been verboten to Nazis not just taking over with their tanks and guns, but with that cultural ideology. So yeah, unfortunately, I think they're like with rock and roll, as you just mentioned too, race music, right? There's always been this sense that white European culture and music are superior, and anything else is a more primitive or polluting form of expression. And unfortunately, I think that's been sort of the hidden agenda. I mean, it's also taking on homosexuality, obviously, when
Mm.
banning books in this county. And again, if it deals with more erotic matters in the story I teach, the music is supposed to be dangerous because it's so wild, it's frenzied. You're not going to have soldiers marching in a straight line. They're all going to be tapped for their both erotic and fear elements that are obviously very individualized. What if a Nazi soldier killing all those people wants to go home and have a nice, innocent, pastoral lives? That wouldn't work for the German army, right? But
Right.
music is what triggers it. It's this woman of German Jewish ancestry who triggers both the erotic and bluesy feelings of the soldiers. Like all these stormtroopers are getting a free pass to her concert in the front row, and they're standing up and cheering while the Nazi censor in the back is taking down all these notes. Where is the music syncopating? Oh no, where is
Yeah.
somebody taking a solo? I've got to report that to the authorities. So
Yeah.
that's obviously an extreme case, but obviously that's my concern also with this country and the current presidential regime and the people who fall in line with the presidential regime.
Yeah.
The president should not be taking over the Center for the Arts, right, and appointing all his favorites to that board,
Yeah.
who are going to take the wind out of any kind of daring artistic movements that dare to criticize the
Yeah.
status quo in this nation, which, of course, I think you and I would both agree still has a good deal of work to do to
Oh, yeah.
pursue, life, liberty, justice, pursuit of happiness, and so on in this country for everybody, right?
Oh,
So,
absolutely.
yeah, that's the answer in short. Music stirs up all these dangerous passions, however,
Yes.
they're configured by the censors,
Yes. Well, and I love
and
that
literature
music
too.
does that because books do it too. And I've talked about Andy Kopic has a poem. He's one of our poets in our shop, and he has a poem, and I can never remember what it is. And someday it's going to stay in my head. But the first line is the poem is, "I am a victim of my own mind." And I
Mm-hmm.
love how words, either set to music or just read, can ignite some kind of feeling in you that is sometimes you just can't explain. But, like the poem Invictus. I love that poem so much. It's one of my favorite poems. And my husband had
Mm-hmm.
it calligraphied for me because it's one of my favorite poems. And it's actually the poem that inspired me to start the banned book brigade in response to what's happening. And I think it's really amazing how words, the power of words, the power of music, the power of the spoken word, the power of reading something that just floors you because it's so, so powerful. Is there, when you teach your class, like what is the response that your students have to the power of the words in the music, and like do they have responses? What kind of questions do they ask?
Yeah, it's interesting to have so many students at MTSU who, if they're not actually adept on a musical instrument, they want to go into the music industry, possibly as audio engineers or promoters. So I draw a good number of those students from what is now called the College of Media and Entertainment. And I think a lot of them are on board with the way music gave them, like some kind of autonomy, even if it was a garage band, or even like if they were turntable DJs at some point in their life. Of course, audio engineering is all about, shaping the music to get a certain kind of sound or pastiche. And, these students clearly are in touch with what people in their generation are producing. So I think whenever they see a character who has a dream or a vision of becoming recognized as a musician, those are the stories that clearly trigger their sympathies, their sentiments. Of course, there's right and wrong ways about going into the music business and recognizing the perils and dangers. I'm sure know Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. That's the one play I always teach, set
Oh,
in the
I love that
1920s. And,
so much.
if you want to be the next Ma Rainey, you better be aware of what the music industry did to her and why,
Oh,
her
absolutely.
power is hedged in by the people who have the money, the capitalists, right? So, yeah, it's a tragedy, but you can imagine a play like that, maybe switching course even in the last act. It may not be true to its tone. I mean, it is a very funny and comic play in a lot of places with the dialogues among the musicians. And again, if the character only knew soon enough, I mean, Shakespeare obviously knew that in his dramas too. Tragedy is when somebody acts without full knowledge. So if, Levy, the upstart trumpeter, had actually known what he, had been warned about, we wouldn't have had that murder at the end where he, kills the wisest member of the band, just kind of a frustrated reaction for his, lack of opportunity to be a star. So I think that play, partly because it is a play and has that dramatic element, gets a great deal of, discussion about how we navigate the music business, how we recognize like the power differential between musicians and the people who sign you to contracts and, run the music industry at any given time. Again, I think these stories obviously represent the perspectives of people coming from African American community in particular. So that is something where students need to be more, what can we say, attentive, alert to why music is the way, out of some of the frustration somebody might be growing up with as, one story, Maya Angelou, wonderful writer, obviously why the pianist in that story had to keep proving herself if she came out of a Jim Crow South and gets this kind of bizarre reunion with the girl of a plantation family, who's suddenly marrying an African American man, and trying to kind of like show her she was on her side all along. But, the main character isn't buying it, right? She knew what it was like to grow up with hand me downs and with, just like a servant mentality. She's still kind of dealing with these issues even in her 30s. So,
Yeah.
yeah, any story that gets into like the head of characters that way, I think always gets a strong reaction. We ask where could the character maybe have overcome or confronted their tragedy, where on the other hand is there more of a kind of nice what we say amicable resolution, where some of these differences and barriers are overcome.
Sure. Well, and I think that's really funny that you mentioned the African American music because when I watched, oh, what is his name? Who does all the documentaries? He did one on baseball and on
And Burns.
that.
Yeah, I
Yes,
have to say I wasn't thrilled with the jazz documentary,
I've
partly
heard
because
that. I've
Wynton
heard that
Marsalis
from
is
a lot
only
of people.
one voice among many other qualified people who could have helped with that series. But yeah, I mean, I appreciate what he does as an archivist, and I know he kind of rated the Country Music Hall of Fame for his country documentary, which I haven't watched, but I've done research there too,
Yeah.
working on a book with jazz currents in Nashville. So that was an important place to go. But
Well,
yeah, Burns, I'm sorry if I cut
no,
you
no,
off, but
no,
he
no.
has that,
So, yeah, I couldn't
signature
think of what his name
style.
is. No, so when I watched that documentary, I knew of blues and jazz because I grew up loving that kind of stuff. But I didn't know some of the things that I now know. And I remember the first time I watched it, I just was blown away about the level of music and the history of it that I didn't know. And then the second time, I had a notebook and a pen and wrote down every single artist that he mentioned. And as I'm listening to the stuff, I hear stuff like, that's a Rolling Stones song. That is a Foo Fighters song. Song was
Mhm.
holy crap, and you hear all these songs that are 30 and 40 years old, but I never heard them until they were done by, and no shade to any of these bands at all. But the amount of music that was covered by white musicians that made those songs famous, and then you turn around and you find out that they were done by African American musicians who didn't get the recognition that they
Mhm.
so deserved. And I think that that plays into books as well, how you have these books that are so brilliant, but nobody really gave them the credit that they deserved until it's way
Mhm.
later. And um, I really want to take your class now. Like I have a degree in English, but I really want to take your class now because
Mhm.
I think that would be a very, very interesting class to sit in on and listen to. And see, I didn't know that this is where we were going to go today with music and books because
Mhm.
my favorite play is Othello. Like
Mhm.
I love that, and I think that is the most beautiful thing. And I saw a version of Othello that was done in the Prohibition era um, jazz kind of style when I was in college. I went and that's how they decided to do Othello was from that 1930s swing era, prohibition kind of thing. And the amount of music that they put in it
Mhm.
really made me love it more because it felt like, yeah, that is the era that should have been done in because that music goes right along with what's happening. And yeah, like I love music and it makes me. Who's your favorite jazz musician?
Oh, there's so many. I mean, it's crazy. It's almost like a religious experience for me to put on John Coltrane. I couldn't even listen to
Love
him
John
24 hours
Coltrane.
a day. I would just be, kind of under the sea with all of his
Yeah,
music, even in a short career. But talk about someone whose career continually transformed. I mean, I love Charlie Parker, but what Coltrane did, partly because I like tenor sax sounds better, not to offend the alto people. I mean,
sure.
there's just a kind of depth in it and being able to handle that big instrument as well. But yeah, I mean, I'm kind of like eclectic with so many different eras of jazz. And it's kind of funny because sometimes I think I'm so fussy that, like with vocalists in particular, if I think they're posing too much or too stylized, I really don't like them. I would go back to Billie Holiday
Sure.
instead, who really laid down the template for a lot of people who are still imitating her with that nasal,
Yeah, yeah,
voice.
yeah.
So yeah, and big bands too. I mean, I see it from the point of view of jazz musicians because that's like their great work when they coordinate all those arrangements. But I personally like smaller combos to hear the instrumental
Yeah.
voices and the interplays. Like Sonny Rollins was a great tenor
Oh,
saxophonist, and he didn't even have a piano in a lot of his
right.
trios. And I just think like he had that dynamic voice that would cover all of those musical,
Yeah.
functions that, normally you would see in a bigger combination, different distribution of instruments. So
Yeah.
yeah, when it works right, when you have the right section just pushing the horn, and I play harmonica myself, and I mean, I'm not a,
Oh,
I'm
nice.
learning jazz piano, but I'm not nearly at that level. But I could walk into any blues jam, and what I hear from jazz horn players is really where I get my inspiration to put together solos, the way blues is transformed into jazz kinds of rhythms and harmonies. I think that's really where, even someone without the degree of musical experience can
Yeah.
tap into the root, the basic core of emotional expression in that kind of music. And yeah, I do see them a little like stories because like there's a 12-bar blues form, right? And
Sure.
you're creating an arc every time you do a solo in that limited space where you have to get your message across.
I love Django Reinhardt and Miles Davis and Nina
Mm-hmm.
Simone. The first time I heard Nina Simone sing was in the movie it had Jane or Bridget Fonda in it and she plays an assassin. And I remember I could not concentrate.
Oh, La Femme Nikita, right?
Yes,
But the
yes.
American version of that,
And I
yeah,
remember I couldn't
I forget it's called
concentrate on
No
the
Way Out or
movie
something.
because I kept hearing her sing and going, who the hell is that? And then when I realized who it
Mm-hmm.
was, I literally
Mm-hmm.
could not get enough of Nina Simone's voice and some of her music. It's I have at least 6 albums of her just that I can
Mm-hmm.
listen to. And Miles Davis, the first time I ever heard Kind of Blue, it put me on my ass. And I just the first
Yeah,
time
that's clearly
yeah,
one of
I
the
remember
greatest ever.
buying my
Yeah.
record player and sitting on my floor and closing my eyes and just
Mm-hmm.
listening and just God,
Yeah. And he knew when not to play notes too. I mean, he didn't like really crowded, dense music like, when
mm,
McCoy Tyner was or playing alongside John Coltrane. He thought there were too many notes, but he had Coltrane in one of his classic sextets as well, right? During
Yeah.
Kind of Blue, Coltrane and then Cannonball Adderley on alto sax. They had two completely different styles, but it worked. Obviously, in the way Miles coordinated that kind of instrumental voices, and later he had Herbie Hancock and Wayne Shorter. He really knew how to put together groups, and again,
Yeah.
whose career kept morphing, kept changing. But yeah, with Nina Simone, I do some jazz writing too, like jazz journalism, and I used to interview people, just like you're interviewing me, for when our campus station MOT was all jazz. So yeah, I did a Nina Simone compilation once. I was writing for the Nashville scene, but also American Songwriter and Mississippi Goddamn. I mean, talk about a song that defines a statement for the era. Yeah, so she could do that as well as handle obviously jazz standards in
Yeah.
the sort of
Yeah.
post Billie Holiday vocal manner. Yeah.
Well, we could sit and talk all day long, I think, but we
Mm-hmm.
are running out of time. I want to say thank you so much
Sure.
for joining us and giving me a completely new perspective of music and books. I'm going to have to think about what I want
Mm-hmm.
to listen to now while I read. And I want to go back
Okay.
and rewatch Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. But thank
Yeah, the
go ahead.
I was going to say the Netflix adaptation takes liberties, but I mean, I think it's essentially true to the text. And it's a little interesting casting Viola Davis, and the actor who unfortunately is no longer with us. He is not like the original burly and tough character who played Levy, who was Charles Dutton, who was actually learned acting in prison. He's a great
Sure.
story for transforming one's life. But I was also going to say, with your interest in Mississippi and the blues, I'll put you in touch with someone who I've gotten in contact with named Scott Beretta, who does a lot of what we say like blues heritage work in
Sure.
Mississippi. There's actually a blues trail that he is, helping to curate, and he brought a really great contemporary blues guy, Alvin Youngblood Hart, out to MTSU in conjunction with a photography exhibit. That's one of his
Yeah.
pursuits, Beretta. But he had that in our MTSU gallery, the photo gallery, kind of recreating
I would
a
love
classic
that.
Clarksdale blues. Yeah, so we'll let him know about you, and he'll know, you'll know about him too. So
Sure.
you won't
I have
be
to
out
get
of
him
the
on the
loop on
podcast
any of those
and I'll
events.
have a
Yeah, he's great about publicizing them too.
I love that so much. Well, thank you so much for
Okay.
hanging out with us today. And everybody, definitely start doing your research on what music you want to listen to when you read. And thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Spine Bookcast. And don't forget to like, follow, and share. And we will talk to you soon. Have a great day. Bye.